Developing into speaking skills online. Peter Hawley, with over 40 years of worldwide ELT experience, Peter Hawley is a global trainer blending language education with real-world sustainability.
Give us an enjoyable and very enriching and formative session today. Peter, over to you.
Well, thank you very much again for the introduction, Ahmed, and lovely to be with everyone again on your weekend. Again, it's your precious time, and thank you for committing to your professional development and being with us today. Again, apologies for the technical issues. I thought after last week it would be smoother, but well, anyway, that's the reality. My objective today is to share some thoughts about how to develop speaking skills online, and share with you some ideas for activities, materials, and obviously the basic methodology behind this. So let me see if I can get this right. Okay, right, great. I thought I'd sort of put a couple of words before this. Speak up. If you were with me a fortnight ago, you will be well aware that there are certain things which I do believe we should speak up on, or speak up about even, as educators and indeed as fellow human beings. And obviously with English being a foreign language, there are different skills that you need to be able to do that in the target language. So this is how I've got the session sorted out. You're not in the wrong place. You might look at the first few words and think, what are we doing in a geometry session today? But as you will remember from the last session, I'm a person, and I think that what I'm going to show you will help explain not just my view on but eyes to developing speaking skills. So there will be a bit of an introduction to begin with. If you don't like maths, please don't leave. Whenever we talk about speaking skills, accuracy and fluency comes into the question in terms of what activities we're using, what is our objective, what do we want from our learners, and dovetailed into that is correction, and when we correct and how we correct, what methods we use for that. So again, I've grouped those two together as I think that there is a link, a connection between the two of those. I'll go through an overview of different types of speaking activity. And I was asked to do this with particular attention to online speaking activities. And I have to admit, when I was first asked to do this, I thought, why? But then almost everything I do these days is actually developing speaking activities. Most of it is online. So I think, I hope I can share things which are valid for you. And there are some things that you can do face to face, which you can't do online. We have to be clear about that. But I would argue that there are actually very few, and the things that you can do face to face, largely you can do online. It will be a bit different, but a lot of these activities are transferable, no matter what learning environment you're in. So I will go through that, touch on it, but there are lots of parallels, I think, between classroom, face-to-face environments and the online environment when we talk about speaking skills development. You will remember, if you were with me 2 weeks ago, some of this, and I did want to focus on this specifically again. We didn't really go into it in much detail last time. There was not time, but I said I'd do some things on activities. I'll share some materials, things that I've used with some of the learners I'm engaged with at the moment, because I do want to emphasize that certainly the SDGs, like I said last time, are a very, very rich resource in terms of things that we can use with our learners to develop their language skills, but to develop all sorts of other skills which are, I think, really, really important to us and our planet. So some examples of materials connected to those areas. And I want to share again with you some thoughts. Last time we were together, the focus was very much on the 2025 teacher. And I want to again share some thoughts on what the 2025 learner looks like and what skills we should be developing with them too. So that's my focus. And I hope this time there will be an opportunity to ask questions and that I will be able to see them in the chat, hopefully, but who knows? We'll see. Last time there were messages coming in, but it doesn't seem to scroll down automatically. So I'll try and keep an eye on that and scroll myself. So I hope you're ready for some geometry then. I'm going to start with the triangle, and this isn't my triangle, but a triangle, as you know, has three, whatever you call them, anyway, 3 points to it. And I think this really is a symbol in terms of everything that we're about as educators. What we do is very much a triangular relationship between three things. And I'll use this symbol quite a bit to sort of framework and break up the sections of what I'd like to share with you this afternoon. But this particular triangle in this format is not mine. So one of those points is the teacher, and that's obviously where we're coming from. The next one is the learner, and the person who, well, when I first saw this triangle, the person who put this together was very much focused on materials and materials development. So for that practitioner who were, well, the editor of the text that I'm referring to is actually Brian Tomlinson. There are a lot of other educators involved in this. But the focus was very much on developing materials. And so right at the top of that particular triangle was materials. And I think these move around, and I'll come on to this depending on what our focus is. So here we go. Okay, that was a triangle. This is a square. And this is my square, not somebody else's square. And well, what I think we have as educators is that we always have options in terms of what we're going to do with our learners, how we're going to incorporate things into the lesson that we put together. And we do have many choices. The more we learn about the profession, the more exposure we get to other ideas, and the more choices we have. And in some ways, it gets more and more difficult the more you know. You learn more about methodology, you learn more about activities, different types of activities, and you learn more about the way that you can frame what you do with your learners. So those are your options. And as I say, they get bigger and bigger, and they're a square. So I'm connecting this to, it's actually an idiom an English idiom, which you may know, but the beginning of that is a square peg. So a peg, just in case you're not familiar, is usually something that you put in the ground if you're putting up a tent or something like that. And this is a square-shaped peg, so it's holding the tent. Now, those are our options. But one thing that really affects what options we choose to use in those lessons that we have is the learning situation. And that means we can't use all of the things that we know. Obviously constraints on time, but also the environment that we're in. And I just wanted to include two images there. One of quite a traditional learning environment, a classroom-based one, rows of learners, not in groups. It's a very, very formal, very traditional environment, and obviously with very limited resources and teaching aids, etc. And you probably will have guessed if you were with me 2 weeks ago, this is a classroom from Sudan from 1982. This is actually during an examination, which is why the learners are separated out like that. But a very, very basic environment, obviously reflecting what options you can choose for that situation. And on the right, a very typical one-to-one online environment with a teacher and a student, which is very much how my life is these days. I do work with some groups online, but most of what I do is individuals. I hope that what I share, though, is again transferable, it's extendable to group sessions online too. So we've got our square peg, and we've got a round hole, and this is where the idiom is going. Obviously, you've got the square peg, that's all your options. You've got the round hole, that's the teaching environment, the learning situation. And quite clearly, as I said, we cannot use everything in any particular learning situation. We have to filter things out. We have to be selective, because what we want is that the teaching options that we've chosen very much reflect the learning situation, whether it's the formal classroom environment, the resources we have available, the age of the learners, their abilities, all sorts of things. These should be synchronized. Otherwise, we're not going to maximize the effect of learning. So what we want is not a square peg in a round hole, but a round peg in a round hole. And that's the ideal condition for maximizing learning. So I'm sorry, it's not quite a circle, because I don't have room to add in what I want to do. But to summarize my perspective on everything that I've experienced as an educator over the years that I've been engaged in the profession, this really seems to encompass everything. And I think it's important to reflect on this in terms of how we educate in the situations we've got, whether they are face-to-face or online. So this is my triangle. And yes, the teacher is very much a basis. And materials are very useful, although I will talk a little bit about, minimizing the use of materials, again, reflecting on what I do at the moment. But I fully recognize that for many of you, particularly if you're teaching in the state sector, materials will be absolutely critical, that it will be course book driven, etc., etc. But for me, if you remember the three things, I don't think the materials are the most important thing ever. in our educational situations. And for me, the learner is the key, and the kind of learner you're engaged with. Everyone is an individual, even if you've got a class of 60 students or whatever. They are 60 individuals, and that they all have individual needs. I suppose I'm very fortunate now. Again, most of what I do is one-to-one, so I can focus very, very clearly on what that particular learner needs to help them succeed. But we shouldn't forget, even if we have large groups, that we're not working with this just sort of mass of people who all have the same needs, all have the same level. I don't know if you know the joke about mixed ability groups, for example. How many students does it take to have a mixed ability group? 2. Well, so here's my circle again, and this is back to what I said before, because yes, we've got the inner triangle, we've got the relationship between teacher, materials, and learner, but this doesn't take place in isolation. Again, the round hole that you saw before, the teaching and the learning environment is very critical. And again, the environment that I've been asked to focus on this afternoon, or yeah, it's still afternoon for you, early evening maybe. I've been asked to focus on the online environment, which I will turn to in a little while. So this really underpins everything that I've experienced and learned along the way in my own professional development. So, moving on, speaking skills. Well, I think that there is a sort of simple way of defining speaking skills, and I suppose like you would expect when I was putting this together for today, I turned to Google, and Google initially presented me with this, and it provided this nice diagram. Again, I'm very visual. I like things like this. But it described 4 speaking skills, so fluency, vocabulary, pronunciation, and grammar. And that's fair enough. I think it's quite a simplistic view, but it does help us, particularly when we move on to looking at the differences between fluency and accuracy. I would argue, though, that, again, they're all very closely connected, these. I wouldn't say that fluency is in isolation from having a good and accurate use of vocabulary, etc., etc. So that's a very basic view of what speaking skills are. And I looked elsewhere because I wasn't satisfied with that. It's okay from a linguistic perspective, but there are lots and lots and lots of other skills that we need to have. And I do work with people in business. Soft skills is something I touch on quite frequently with them. And looking at the world of work, and really see any reason why that shouldn't be the world of education in schools or universities. All of these additional skills are also very critical to grow, to develop. We have to have confidence when we're speaking. We must pace properly, use tone and pitch. Storytelling is a very useful skill, even in presentations like this. Again, coming from where I'm coming from, being sensitive to other cultures and what things are accepted adaptable to different cultures, I think is increasingly important in the divisive world that we seem to be living in at the moment. Empathy is critical too. Body language, and I'll return to that later on, because I hope you're thinking already face-to-face, online. Can we really develop these in both places? I'm not sure. When we think about speaking as an active skill, the so-called passive skill of listening is integral too, and active listening is really, really critical if we're going to develop speaking skills. And the real reason for that is that speaking is all about communication. It's not an individual skill. It's something that you share with other human beings. So speaking is communication. And again, looking into this and trying to find some guidelines for what we mean by successful communication, I came across this, and I quite like things where there's a sort of continuing C or whatever, but these are the 7 C's of communication. And again, it comes back to how we speak, or the content of what we're saying. And if we're going to be successful communicators, we have to be clear, and we have to be clear with our vocabulary. We have to be clear with our pronunciation, and the grammar, the syntax have to be very, very appropriate. Otherwise, meaning can be lost, and communication is not two-way anymore. So clarity is important. I think we can argue that being concise is also important. Although I'm afraid for you this afternoon, listening to me go on and on for an hour and a half, I'm not going to be very concise. But anyway, things should be concrete. They should be quantifiable. They should be something stable, something that you can grasp. It should be correct. Well, here we come back to accuracy, fluency, and again, I'll come back to that later on. Coherence, obviously. Complete. Well, again, to be a successful communicator, you have to get your message across completely. So yes, and the final one there, being courteous, respecting the person that you are speaking to or listening to, showing respect for them as individuals, no matter what nationality they are, what culture they are, what religion they are, what sex they are. Being courteous is so critical in terms of successful communication. So let's look a bit at fluency and accuracy. Again, when you sort of train up as an educator, and you're looking at speaking skills development in particular, you know, you get trained to think about, are we doing a fluency-based activity, or is it an accuracy-based activity? And this may vary according to the level of the learner. It obviously varies because of the situation that you're in. So going back to the square and the circle before, we do have all these options. Are we going to go for fluency, or are we going to go for accuracy? And whatever the learning situation is, is certainly going to have an impact on what activity we do. Ability, you know, situation, the environment, and what our objectives are, what our learners' objectives are too. And I'm sharing words which aren't recent. I mean, they're over 10 years old now. And it's from a blog put together, as I say, quite a while back. But again, I think the imagery is quite interesting to look at. And these are the reflections of a gentleman called Anthony Ashe, who had a blog. I don't think his blog exists anymore. But he wrote and shared this image, reflecting on a workshop that Scott Thornberry had given at a teaching conference in Italy earlier in 2014. And he was defining what fluency means based on what he'd heard. And perhaps that is something that's more challenging to do, because I think accuracy is more understandable. It's easier to measure, it's easier to quantify. But what do we actually mean by fluency in the target language? And Anthony came out of that workshop, and he had these comments to make in summary. And that there are some words to pull out there. Impression, fluency. Is it something that we think we hear, or is it something that is really there? Is it an impression, or is it a fact? Well, he's used the word impression, because you can have you can have non-native speakers, learners of English, who are fluent by any sense of the definition. And you can have native speakers of English who are theoretically fluent, but are they? You can listen to native speakers who are not really fluent. If we use these words as definitions. Idioms. Lots of idioms, as you know, in English. Are they like square peg, round hole? Are these actually understandable at the time we say them? Because that is critical. There's absolutely no point in using an idiom if it doesn't resonate with the situation that you're in. I mean, is it intelligible? So the black comments, language structures that are appropriate. Well, we're sort of at the boundary of accuracy and fluency there, aren't we? And I think that is reflected in Anthony's circular diagram, that, yeah, fluency is the bigger picture, but within that, accuracy is also important, but it's not the focus. It's not the focus. So using structures that are appropriate. Interestingly, though, not always what we could call complex structures. Very often fluency involves using simple structures. And this is quite interesting in terms of how we assess the levels of learners. So that's a thing to throw out there. Obviously, we have to use vocabulary that's appropriate for the topic, fair enough. Runs of words with pausing, so we could talk about chunks of language, collocations, etc., all combining with pausing, and that reflects what natives would do. I'm doing it now, and I'm also filling pauses with fillers. You will probably be well aware by now, I use quite a lot and quite a lot. There you are, just done it again. Whenever I'm engaging in things like this, in teacher training workshops or webinars, I wasn't actually really aware aware of that until I had to record myself a while back and saw how often I do that. And sometimes when I start sessions, I actually play a game of bingo with the educators I'm involved with and ask them to shout out bingo when they've heard me use the word, well, the filler, or more than 10 times, and it usually happens quite quickly. Idioms, again, said there, and repeating words and structures. I've done that quite frequently already, emphasizing things, repeating what we say to make it fluent. So that was an interesting perspective on fluency and accuracy, I thought. And as I've said, I think accuracy is easier to define, and it's basically a dichotomy of right or wrong, and I'll come on to that in a second. I wanted to say a few words about dogma and what we could call teaching unplugged. And again, Scott, who you had time with in this session of professional development workshops and presentations, and he developed the theory of dogma, or the methodology of dogma, quite a while ago now, and I think it could even be the 25th anniversary of that this year. And this is a methodology that I use quite a lot, if not exclusively these days, because most of the online work I do, and even some of the face-to-face work I do, is conversation driven, and dogma is very much conversation driven, and it's also very student centered, because the language that evolves from the conversation is generated largely by the student as an individual, and what language they bring to the conversation is the language that is worked on, if need be. And back to my triangle, I'm totally happy with that, totally happy that the student is the center of this. It also focuses on emergent language, because in a conversation, you might start with a topic, you might start with a theme, and then what happens after that, the language that comes out of that conversation, I won't say you lose control of it as an educator, but it is very much driven by the learner. And so the language that emerges from that conversation, the grammatical things that might come up, the structural things, the lexical things that you need to focus on, it's all coming from the learner, and I think that's absolutely fantastic. Well, perhaps I'm getting a bit lazy these days. I don't know, but I don't prepare that much. I have done for today, I have to stress, but in my normal teaching, I don't really prepare very much. I like to use something as a catalyst for the discussion, or it may be something that's come up in the previous session that I've had with the learner, but I don't prepare very much. And maybe that's a good thing, maybe it's a bad thing. I don't use a course book, for example. What I think could have been Scott saying a while back, that using a course book exclusively is about, it's almost like drinking decaffeinated coffee, if you see what I mean. So you need to spice it up a bit. So minimal materials, as I've said, minimal preparation, conversation driven, very student centered, and that's where I'm at now. But I won't deny I'm in a very lucky position as a freelancer. I'm not constrained by any requirements from an institution. I suppose the only constraint I have is the learner that I engage with. And one of the things I like to use when I'm interacting with my learners is I like to use infographics. And I used quite a few the last time we were together too. And I like them because they're visual, but they also have words on too. So there's a springboard to language development. There's a sort of support in terms of vocabulary and concepts there too, if your learners need a more scaffolded approach to what you do. So I like infographics, but I do choose them quite selectively. And I just wanted to show you a couple of things that I've done quite recently. And this one is all about culture. I've touched on that already, on differences between nations, between peoples of different creeds, religions, etc., etc. And I've become quite concerned in some situations that, again, this divisiveness within the world, increasing divisiveness, this issue with different cultures feeling they are superior for some reason or other, that is hugely problematic in terms of my worldview. And when you're dealing with younger people especially, I think that's something that you need to address before it spirals. So this is an infographic that I've used with some of my teenage learners recently. Where I'm based now, there is a very large Roma minority. And that minority in the national population is often quite stigmatized, lots of stereotypes, and I obviously don't like that, but I see that kind of mindset coming out in quite young people. And so this is one of the infographics that I've used recently to try and address the development of that mindset and hopefully encourage my learners to think differently. That's another one I've used with younger learners as well as adults, and I quite frequently use this at the beginning of the year if you have New Year's resolutions or whatever. These are quite nice ones to look at. And again, with anything like this, even with the infographic, the first infographic, there is a great opportunity for a conversation about whether people agree or disagree, and if they don't agree, why not? So these are things which I like and use extensively in the teaching I do at the moment to get things started in a conversation. So I really love these. I use them in teacher training quite a lot too. Okay. Correction. Well, I think we've all got our views on when to correct and when not to correct. And when we enter the profession and go on, formal training courses, there are often, I suppose, rules about when you should correct, when you should not correct. And I think the more we evolve as educators, we start not to use those rules, because I think we all know that there is a secret to when we do this, just like with the secret to so much of what we do as educators. well, this is the secret. When do we correct? Well, it depends. I don't think there are rules on that. It depends on so many things. And going back to that circle earlier, the teaching and learning environment, going back to that triangle, which for me has the learner at the top of it, when and how we correct really depends so much on so many things. I don't think you can have rules about when to or when not to. We could argue that there are more likely rules about when not to correct, but that's another discussion, I think. So, fluency. I shared with you some thoughts from another educator reflecting on Scott's workshop, and I wanted to connect that with correction, really. And when I start, usually when I start any series of language development sessions with the learners I'm privileged to engage with, I start with a diagram which looks very much like this in terms of my expectations. Well, not expectations, that's way too strong. What I hope we will experience together in our language development sessions. And I explain to them that certainly if we're in a fluency conversation-based session, then in terms of communication and effective speaking communication, then I think of things which are in the green zone, the smiley face zone, and those are totally right. No question about the language being used. Totally happy with that. No miscommunication. Maybe no mistakes, no need for correction. Maybe no slips, and certainly no errors. So that's the green zone, and I suppose that could be the target zone, if you like. But if you get learners fixed on always being green, then you miss out on that middle ground. And I say that for me, there is a lot of language which is not 100% accurate, but it's effective communication because the meaning of the person you're engaged with is clear. It might not be grammatically correct. It might use strange word forms or whatever. Even the pronunciation might be a little bit challenging, but it's not causing miscommunication. So I think learners, particularly when they're at lower levels, they need to be encouraged. They shouldn't be discouraged by the fear of going into the red zone by making a mistake. If they don't know something that's completely green, they shouldn't keep silent. They shouldn't be afraid of going into the yellow zone. And the red zone, I would argue, in fluency work, online or face to face, the red zone is when I think we should step in and consider correction. And I suppose there are two things there. Is the learner making a slip? So are they saying something which is not correct, even though they know if you ask them to self-correct, they do know what thing they should have said. I mean, it's usually things like the third person S, sometimes tense usage, and you know, with the learners I've got in Hungary, they have specific phonological problems with v and w, and sometimes that impacts on understanding. So those are things that I would correct. And then we've got errors where, you know, they don't know what the right thing is. So you need to help with that. So that's fluency. And that's my view on correction and fluency and the kind of language that's generated. And so then we've got the same perspective for accuracy. And I would say that with accuracy, again, you are thinking right or wrong. That middle ground, which in a fluency-based activity is acceptable because there's no misunderstanding, even if it's not right. So that's my view, simplistically, of language in fluency, language in accuracy, and where our role is as an educator in terms of correction and how we do it and when we do it. So that's my traffic light view. And as I say, I start off with that right in my first session with the learners I engage with. So fluency, accuracy, correction. In the beginning, when I was giving an overview, I said I would go through some types of speaking activity, and you know, like a lot of what I'm showing this afternoon, I borrowed it and adapted it a bit. And if you were with me last time, I was recommending a blog called ELT Buzz, which is where I've acquired this image from. And there are 15 types of speaking activity there. I don't think there'll be anything new there for you. Even in the age of AI and ChatGPT, I mean, one of the boxes there is online tools, and I'll give you an example of how I've used online tools later on. But I think even with the increasing use of AI, I don't really see anything new coming out in speaking activity types. So if you can see these, info gaps, face-to-face, online, I have no problem with that. Role play, again, no problem with that. Mingling, it's technologically a bit more challenging and well beyond my capabilities in online platforms, but that's not impossible. Conversation, yes. Interviews, yes. Inside and outside, well, this is a more physical activity, and it requires learners being really face-to-face. So that's one I would question about using online. Dialogues, yes. Storytelling, yes. Picture prompts, yep. Free speaking, yes. Online tools, again, I'll share some of those too. Games, discussion and debate. Okay. So I think these are all valid. I would take out mingling, as I've said, because that's a more physical activity. But for those of you who are more tech savvy, you may be able to find a way of doing that. I certainly can't. So take out mingling and take out that one I spoke about, being in a circle or two circles and talking to each other together. So for online speaking activities and the development of English speaking skills and communication skills, I don't really see that much difference between online and face-to-face. So there you go. That's my perspective on different activities. And so that sort of begs the question: if there aren't really many differences in terms of activities, what are the differences between working in an online environment and a face-to-face environment? And I thought about this quite a bit, and really it's quite hard not to view face-to-face or classroom-based speaking skills development as optimal over online. I don't know how you feel about that, but when I have face-to-face sessions, I find it so much easier and so much better in terms of achievement and development of the skills, and I find it far more enjoyable too. I don't necessarily enjoy this, for example. Here we are, we're not in the same room. It'd have to be a really big room if we were, but there is no sort of contact. I can't even see your faces in this format. So there you go, online. But there are some things, I mean, I know evidently online formats and online learning situations were very much forced on us by the pandemic. They were there before, but certainly extensively. That's when things really took off with online learning. Yeah, I mean, there are advantages which I've not put here. And one of them is what we got today. I mean, here I am sitting in Central Europe. You're all in another part of the world, and yet we're able to communicate online, and I can share thoughts with you, which is wonderful using the technology. But if we think about it, and you may or may not agree with all of these, if you are online, it's not impossible to build a rapport with the people, the learners you're engaged with, but it's certainly more difficult to build that rapport, I would say. It's also harder to develop what we could call a community in learning, whether it's within a classroom or a small group. The very fact that you have usually you've got different people and different screens, etc., etc. It's although you can use breakout rooms or whatever to bring people together. I think it is harder online to develop that feeling of that sense of community. Obviously, and today is another great example of this, like it was a fortnight ago. Technical challenges. It wasn't miscommunication earlier on this afternoon, it was zero communication, which sometimes happens when you're online. Obviously, there could be issues with bandwidth, people not having a fast enough internet connection, or new enough hardware, or whatever, all sorts of things which could interfere with the flow of the session. And again, if you're working with groups online, sometimes there is a feeling in learners that they're not really, again, back to that triangle with the learner at the top and everyone being an individual. I think it's possibly more difficult to give individual feedback if you're working online. So, maybe we could say that these are positives for face-to-face communication and speaking skills development. Talked a little bit earlier in terms of successful communication about non-verbal communication, and that's probably clearer if you're in the same room as people than it is if you're looking at people through a computer screen. Again, the second one, I'm not so sure, but again, I've got the luxury of most of my work being one-to-one these days. So giving feedback in real time, using the chat box, encouraging self-correction through the words that I say, that's not so much a challenge for me working individually. And I think this last one, though, I think, if we're honest about it, face-to-face learning environments are generally more collaborative and generally more interactive than an online environment. Okay, we can blend things, and again, when do we go online? When do we go face-to-face? go back to my earlier secret to teaching with correction. When do we do that? It depends, doesn't it? But whatever we're doing with speaking skills, whether we're face-to-face or online, I think we need to be very careful about this. And I don't know if you've seen this before, but we all know ESP, we all know EAP, we know CLIL, etc., etc. If you don't know about tenor, then this is really something to be quite aware of, because tenor, my slide has gone all corrupted. Tenor stands for teaching English for no obvious reason. And, you know, if we're going to do any kind of language or any kind of education full stop, there must be a pretty good reason for doing it. We're not just filling up time. So be aware of the trap of doing activities for the sake of it, to fill up the time. You know, we've got an important job to do as educators, and that's to develop skills. It's to develop language in an EFL environment. And if you find yourself doing anything in the realm of tenor, then stop. So, moving on, I said I wanted to share some materials with you, and so for this section with the triangle, the focus is very much on materials. But again, back to tenor, where do we source our materials from? And I go back to where I was 2 weeks ago with you, and all of the materials that I will share with you for the rest of this session will be either directly connected to the UN Sustainable Development Goals, because I do want to emphasize these are really, really good content areas and absolutely critical in terms of our planet. So I wanted to really focus on those with you this afternoon in terms of materials. I mentioned last time that there are loads of things you can access online, free. This is just another example produced by Nick Peachy, who you may know. And he put together a handbook which he's made freely available on his website, and I found that quite useful in terms of activities using the SDGs, not necessarily strictly to do with speaking, but there you go. So this is one that I've done, and again, connecting to those activity types, I would use this in an interview situation where you're developing spoken language that way. And it's an activity which I borrowed quite a while back. I think it was actually from a publisher from materials, I can't remember which one. And they called the activity In Their Shoes. And the idea is that you try and put yourself in the shoes of another human being, and you then structure how you think about what shoes they're in, asking yourself various questions, which I put on the right there. And you can see if the image is clear. This is driven very much by the environment. It's a young woman, I think, possibly in India or Bangladesh. I think there's a lot of plastic sorting out and, well, dumping by the first world for sorting out and hopefully recycling in countries in the global south. So this is a woman whose job is to sort out plastic used plastic bottles into different colours. So I've done this quite a lot because it sort of addresses several things in terms of awareness, particularly for people in Europe who I mostly interact with. You know, what's the impact? Where does their plastic go to? Well, a lot of it goes here, and it ends up in the hands of a woman like this. So interviewing them, who are they? What are they doing? Where are they? What are they thinking? A lot of it is to do with emotions and their view on life. So what's important to them? I mean, you can absolutely guarantee that this woman really isn't thinking about the environment. This is just a job. The job is important to put food on the table. What are they feeling physically? You know, feeling all the plastic around them. What are their hopes and what are their fears? So really putting someone in the shoes of another human on the planet. And I would connect this one, just for the sake of argument, to SDG 12 and responsible consumption and responsible production, because the plastic problem is a huge problem with packaging, with production of new plastic to make new bottles rather than recycling. So that's the SDG I've connected that activity to. Next one, public speaking. I saw this image a little while ago. It's actually from Australia, where the effect of climate change has really started to make things more dangerous with fires, etc. And this was actually connected to a news article about the UK, where they're going to introduce similar signage to warn against possible fires. So the idea with this one is that we're getting the learners to think about, well, what's happened before? This is the present. Where are we going? What's the future? So I connected that one to climate action, and again, public speaking as a speaking activity, making a speech about what's going on and what we should be concerned about. Storytelling was another one, and I often use picture stories with no words on. You know, with very young learners, very low level learners too, because it gets them to generate the language. And so this is a storytelling picture story. And again, if you look at this, you can see there is an environmental message in that. And so that one connected to life below water, just as an example. As I've said, I am a visual person. Yeah, someone's just asked where to get these photos from. Well, Google Images is a source for me, and where I can do, I credit them. I also try and use quite a few of my own images too. You know, copyright is such a grey area, isn't it, in education? But where I can do, then I credit. And this is one that I found quite recently in terms of satellite imagery on Gaza, and as a picture prompt, I think this is, you know, incredible to talk about in terms of before and after developments, sadly, in a very traumatized part of our planet. So that's the SDG that I connect that activity to, you know, to get people to think about what's going on. So anyway, okay. Discussion and debate was another speaking activity. Yes, you're absolutely right, Mona. Gaza in 2025. As far as I read somewhere in the news just a few days ago that apparently Google satellite images is only just updating for 2024. So, you know, well, I think we all know it's far, far worse now. But unfortunately, I don't have a current image I could share for that activity. Anyway, discussion and debate. I shared some thoughts about AI in the last session, and sometimes I do language development work around that, connected to education, with students, school students especially, and the ethics of doing it. This is not an online activity, obviously, but it's very easy to do online, and this is something that I did with the teachers I was training last summer. And it, you know, basically got one half of the group to be pro AI and the other half to not be pro, and a lot of language came out of that. Online tools. If you're familiar with what your carbon footprint is, then I won't go into that in any detail, but there are tools that you can find online that will enable individuals to measure what their personal carbon footprint is. And this is one which is free access from a website which is amazingly creatively called carbonfootprint.com. So that very easy to remember. And I'm in the drop down menu there, if you can see, calculate. And the second option there is free calculators. So these are calculators that you can use individually to calculate your own carbon footprint. And I've had learners do this individually or in groups, in classes, calculating their own carbon footprint, which is an eye-opener in itself in terms of speaking about it, but then comparing, contrasting, etc., etc. So I connected that one specifically to energy because there's a lot of questions about that in the review. So that's an online tool. Right. So those were just, ooh, what's happened? Yeah, those were just some examples of SDG linked material. I'm sorry, I'm going back a bit again in terms of last time we were together, because again, I felt we didn't have enough time to exploit what I wanted to share in more detail. But I talked about the IDGs as an extension of the SDGs, and these are very much focused on the actual skills that we hope to develop through the content of the SDGs. And those were the 5 areas again. And I think a lot of those are directly relevant to speaking skills development. All those things to do with yourself affect, you know, the sort of meaning that you put into the words you say. You have to have a sense of perspective in the pink area. You have to connect, obviously. You have to relate to others if you're communicating with spoken language, especially. And if you're in group work, if you're communicating, then collaboration is key, and all of those skills can fit into speaking skills development. And again, touched on it last week in terms of actual what you do with all of those skills and all of that content knowledge. And so I think the IDGs are worth reflecting on in terms of speaking skills development online and face-to-face too. So those are the IDGs. One thing, again, I haven't mentioned so far in terms of speaking skills development, and again, this is something that can be online or face-to-face. Again, I'd probably say it's more productive doing it face-to-face, but nevertheless, you can carry out projects online. And this is, I put Christopher's book up there really to encourage you to look at it if you're interested in this area again, in terms of resources. But there is a whole section on project work ideas in that resource. And again, a connection to what we talked about a bit last time with 21st century skills and the 4 C's and development of those being so important to learners as they progress through the century. And those 4 C's, collaboration, creativity, critical thinking, and, you know, the bottom line, communication. Project work is perfect for this kind of activity. So I wanted to mention that too. I also wanted to mention the other resource. Well, there are others, but these are the 2 most recent teacher resources if you're interested in this area of language development. And this is a more recent one by Harry Waters. And one of the sections in that book is very, very much focused on change making. And again, if you go with me with that final part of the IDGs, slide before last, it's okay having the content knowledge. It's okay even having the skills development knowledge. But then where do we go? What do we do with all of that? And Harry is very much an advocate that we have a responsibility to be change makers ourselves as educators, and in using that responsibility that we, and power, I suppose we could call it, that we actually make our learners change makers too, because they are growing up in such a challenging environment for all sorts of reasons. So that's another resource to have a look at, and obviously a lot of speaking involved in that. So 2 more triangles very quickly. As I said right at the beginning, when I had my own view of the triangle, for me, we should always be thinking about the learner as the priority. So I just wanted to, you know, so away from materials, what can we say about the learner and the learner in 2025, and therefore what should be our focus on speaking skills development with our learners now. So last time I was together with you, I shared a very similar infographic about the characteristics of 21st century teachers. And this is quite similar. It's similar visually because it's come from the same source. But a lot of these, if you remember on about the last time, a lot of these are the same for learners as they were for educators when we last looked at it. So collaboration is important. Being environmentally conscious is important to learners these days. Again, we talked about AI literate last time in more detail, but AI literacy is important to learners. Being resilient, being adaptive, and I think last time we looked at it, it was a responsibility of educators to, you know, have their learners become fully global citizens. And again, I think that's a responsibility for us too in what we do and how we encourage them to speak and be active. So that's learners these days. Again, I wanted to go back and reinforce this message about the importance of global citizenship. And again, the connection to speaking skills, it's very easy to make. Again, blue, the materials, the yellow, the skills, and the green, the action. And again, I think that links in quite nice to where I'm coming from as an educator. And I shared this with you last time in terms of the things that we should be doing, I believe, as educators with our learners, all of those 5 things. And by extension, I believe very strongly that speaking skills should encourage and develop a sense of belonging, a sense of empathy came up earlier on in one of the things I shared earlier. Talked about cultural awareness and understanding, obviously peace and conflict resolution, absolutely critical, the bigger picture, the environment, and again, preparing our learners for the globalized world that they will enter or are in already in the future. So there's a direct connection, I think, between GCE development and speaking skills development. But again, thinking about the learner, I think and I suppose this is a reflection on materials too. Whatever we do in speaking skills development, online or face-to-face, there are some things we should think about. One is that, particularly when you're dealing with things to do with the environment, to do with climate change, to do with pollution, to do with war, it is important that as educators, our pedagogy should be a hopeful one. There's been quite a bit of research recently, and especially in terms of younger learners, about them, their mental health being affected quite seriously by climate anxiety. And so if we do agree that working in these areas, using these content areas is useful, not just in terms of language development, we should be aware that what we do is not doom and gloom. We should see some positives and share those positives with our learners. Another thing is that we should, whatever we do, we should be thinking about what we can do with our own curriculum. And I know many of you are engaged in learning environments which are, what should we say, constrained by course books or constrained by Ministry of Education syllabus documents. All sorts of things are there to perhaps frustrate you in going beyond that and using the kind of things that I'm advocating as important for our learners these days. But there are things, if you look through your material that you have to use, are there things that you can adapt or change to make them greener or to make them more sustainable? And I think if we think carefully about it, collaboratively with the other teachers that we work with our colleagues, I would hope that we could find a way of doing this. Think local. So, in your own learning environments, I think a lot of the people I'm with this afternoon are from Egypt or Saudi Arabia, and other areas in the Arab world. What's the situation locally? How can we relate what's going on locally to these global issues so that they resonate with learners and they're therefore more interesting? I think we can build in routines, whether it's having recycling bins in classrooms, that kind of thing, using less paper, all of that kind of stuff. And again, I think for us as the educators in the room, we have to think about ourselves, and we have to think about whether we are actually, practicing what we preach, would be a phrase. Another one is, are we actually walking the talk? Are we doing what we're saying? Are we being are we being good global citizens? So back, coming towards the end here, back to us. We've had the materials as the focus. We've had the learner as the focus, and we've had connections with those, and speaking skills development, whether it's online or face to face. And the last time we were together, I shared quite a few ideas in terms of our own continued development, and the importance of us being lifelong learners, and seeing what's out there. A lot of what I've shared about speaking skills development, although the focus requested was that it would be on online speaking skills development, looking into it in more detail, I found, as I shared, that there aren't that many new things we could say, even with the development of technology. So what can we do maybe to create those new things? I don't know. I'm at the stage of my career where I'm sort of not going that way anymore. And again, as I said, I'm not tech savvy enough. I'm sure with AI, as that becomes better at what it does, the opportunities to use that to enhance learning will become more. I have other thoughts about that, as I said last time, in terms of the planet, but that's another story. So I wanted to share with you a couple of things in conclusion about teachers and education. And so in typical CELTA format, if you've done a CELTA course, you will probably be familiar with the session where you have to teach a foreign language to the participants, the other educators in the room. So I'm going to do a tiny bit of foreign language learning with you remotely, and just to share a concept with you, which is not from my culture. So, two thoughts. Have you found your I don't know if you know what language that is. Any guesses? I'm looking in the chat for once. Any guesses what language that is? Japanese, perfect. Well done, Hashim. Well done. Yeah, it's Japanese. Right. Next question. Can anyone pronounce it or transcribe the pronunciation? And don't use Google to do it either. Okay. Any attempts at this? Any brave people trying to translate it or say it in? No. Okay. Well, this is a Japanese word, and a Japanese concept. And I find Japanese culture quite interesting. There's some lovely ideas here. Unfortunately, no. But anyway, keep going. I find it quite fascinating, some of the ideas that come out of Japan. Hashim again. Aha. Okay, very good. The word is ikigai, and I can't pronounce very many Japanese words, but my golden rule is that you're not pronouncing them correctly unless you're smiling. So this is ikigai, and it's a very small diagram there. But if you're interested in this, I think it's quite a valid way of looking at what we're doing and why we're doing it. And that's, you know, for us as educators, it's something that we need to reflect on quite frequently. And ikigai, usually in terms of you know, your work environment, it's your reason for being. It's your reason for being alive almost. And the concept of ikigai is that if you are going to have ikigai, you have to have 4 things that are working in balance. And the first thing is that you should be doing something that you love. So, you know, question for you, Monday morning before you go to work, are you doing what you love? The next one, are you doing something that you're good at? Well, that's a difficult question, isn't it? I think for educators, we are very, I think by nature, we're very reflective professionals. And I think we're also, if we take lifelong learning seriously, as we should, then we can always be better, I think, through contact with colleagues, through CPD, like you've committed your valuable time to over these weeks. So we can always be better. Are you doing something that you can be paid for? Well, yeah, you can always be paid a bit more if you're a teacher. But yes, we are rewarded. Well, that's perhaps too big a word. We are given things financially for what we do. But I think paid, we often think in terms of money. But I think we are rewarded in so many other ways which are not financial. Whether it's, you know, that feeling of success when you have a learner who's mastered something that they've been struggling with for a while, and you know, that is such a reward that you can't put that into monetary terms. So I think there are other things which paid for means rather than just money. And the final thing is, are you doing something that the world needs? And perhaps world is too big a word, so we could bring that down to community, to society, and you know, well, I can't remember exactly what the wording was last time about teachers changing the world. The world needs us. I do believe that very strongly, and what we do in the course of the educational activities we do is necessary. So that's an idea. I concluded last time with a poem, and I did say at the time that the poem would be on the final slide, but then I realised that at least if it was the same for you, that what was being shared afterwards was the actual recording of the session. So my final slide was not in the PowerPoint, so you wouldn't have got the poem. If you couldn't manage to find it, then this is Alan Maley's poem written down. And you know, there's that second question again. Are you a teacher or are you a cheater? So that's the other question I wanted to share with you. Okay. So final thing, I'd just like to advertise, if I may, if the plug gets pulled on me, I'm sorry, but I am advertising some free CPD in 1 week's time, actually. I mentioned when we first met that I'm actively involved in Green Action ELT. We have an online conference a week today, Friday, 6th of June. There will be 7 practitioners sharing activities and thoughts on teaching for a better future. You just need to register. There will be a certificate of attendance. I see from the chat that is very important for people creating a portfolio of things. Sorry, just turning off my timer. We've also been supported with various prizes in terms of ebooks of sorry, that there is, I see on the slide that the URL has got corrupted, hasn't it? Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Okay. If I remember correctly, after greenactionelt.uk, there is a / and then the word events. So I think I can put that in the chat. So if you put the word events after / U or UK / and I'll certainly forward the link to Monglish as soon as I get offline now, so you've got that. We've been very lucky. There's been support with a couple of publishers in terms of ebooks of the 2 titles that I shared with you earlier on. And it would be lovely to have as many of you who, if you're interested in this area, join us. So that would be fantastic. Okay, right. So there you go. And I am into the chat, and I'm in the right place. So if anyone does have any questions, I will try and answer them. Otherwise, thank you very much for being with me again. I am, as I said last time, I'm on LinkedIn. If you want to connect, I'd be very happy to connect. As I said, I don't really share very much in terms of ELT teaching anymore. It's more about bigger picture things. So there you go. Okay.
Thanks a lot, Peter.
You're welcome.
Yeah, an informative session. I'd like to thank you again for the great contribution to the STEP professional development program, and hope to have you again in the future. And I would also like to thank our audience and for their patience with us for a whole month of professional development sessions. We hope that you all found the sessions useful. And did you manage to take any questions, Peter? From
well, I'm just looking. Well, thank you for your compliments. There's a question there about CELTA. Is a CELTA better or a master's degree?
Okay.
That's a big one. I think well, a CELTA is we can't really call it an entry level professional qualification, but it's certainly a more accessible and you could say more practical thing to get as you're starting out in the profession than an academic master's degree would be. But it's really chalk and cheese. You can't really compare one with the other. If you're at the stage in your career where you think the investment in a master's degree is your next step, then I personally, when I had to, when I chose to make that decision personally, I had options in terms of an MA in applied linguistics or an MA in TEFL, and I looking at them, I thought that the applied linguistics ones were more theoretical, and I wanted something for my own development to be more practical. So I went for an MA in TEFL rather than applied linguistics. Thank you, Hashim, again for sharing that link. It's been brilliant. Okay, I can't see any other questions there other than logistics to do with certificates and everything. Okay.
Yeah, for the certificates, of course, the support team, because we have a minimum percentage of the session attended. Where for the certificates, of course, the Safi and his team will actually be in touch with you through emails, and you should actually receive your certificates very soon, inshallah. Thanks again for your time, everyone. Peter, I'd like to extend my sincere thanks again to you and contribution to the program.
I've just spotted another question. Sorry to interrupt you, Ahmed, and it's to do with IELTS. And the question is what's the difference between general speaking and IELTS? Well, I think what you might be referring to is the two types of the IELTS exam. And there's an academic IELTS and there's a general speaking IELTS. The general speaking one is usually used more for immigration and work purposes when you're going to a country like Australia or the UK or whatever. Whereas IELTS academic is if you hope to go on to study in English in a country in an institution where they accept IELTS scores. Yeah, I can't see anything else. Yeah, I thank you, Lena, sorry. I hope for a better, greener world too. Okay. Oh, teaching IELTS, general and academic. Ooh, what to say there? It's been a million years since I did that, Mansour. I think a first reference point would be to go online and look at the handbooks that are freely available from it will either be British Council or Cambridge Assessment or IDP Australia. There are freely available handbooks which are guides for teachers teaching IELTS, and they will differentiate between general training and academic. I hope that helps. Okay.
Any other questions? I don't think we have. I'm just taking a look because I was really moving between the Q&A and the chat. That's why I was confused.
Yeah. No, well, thank you all again. It has been an honour to be with you again on a Friday afternoon. Your weekend. Thank you so much for being with us and committing to your journey in the academic profession. Okay.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Okay. Right. Good luck and enjoy the rest of your weekend. Yeah. Bye-bye.
You too. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
And have a great rest of your weekend. Bye-bye.
Join STEP today and take your teaching to new heights.